Cyrus the Great's story begins not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet strategy of diplomacy and foresight. In the ancient world, empires were built on the force of arms, the will to conquer and destroy. Yet, Cyrus, born in 600 BCE in the heart of Persia, would reshape this notion. He would go on to establish the Achaemenid Empire, a sprawling kingdom that, at its zenith, stretched from the Indus Valley to Egypt and from the steppes of Central Asia to the Mediterranean coast. Unlike most conquerors of his time, however, Cyrus did not rely solely on military might to expand his territory. His genius lay not in the number of battles he fought, but in the way he won them, by winning over hearts and minds, forging alliances, and securing loyalty through respect and pragmatism. Cyrus was born to Cambyses I, the king of Anshan, a small yet strategically positioned kingdom within the Persian Empire, which was then a part of the Median Empire. His mother, Mandane, was the daughter of Astyages, the king of Media. The lineage of Cyrus thus bore the weight of two powerful dynasties: the Medes, a significant force in the ancient world, and the Persians, who were considered minor players at the time. His birth, however, marked the beginning of a story that would disrupt the ancient power dynamics of the region. The early life of Cyrus, steeped in royal blood and military traditions, promised much. Yet, it was the circumstances of his youth that would mold him into a ruler unlike any other. The pivotal moment came when Astyages, Cyrus's grandfather, had a troubling dream. Dreaming that his daughter's son would one day overthrow him, Astyages took an extreme step to neutralize the potential threat. He ordered the baby Cyrus to be killed, but the execution did not go as planned. The man entrusted with the task, a servant named Harpagus, was moved by the innocence of the child and could not bring himself to harm him. Instead, he abandoned Cyrus in the wilds of Persia, a decision that would not only spare the young prince's life, but set in motion the events that would eventually see him replace Astyages on the throne. Cyrus was found by a herdsman, who took him in and raised him as his own. The boy grew up unaware of his true heritage, yet fate was always at work. His natural leadership qualities, combined with a fierce intellect, soon became apparent. Even in his youth, Cyrus exhibited a remarkable ability to inspire those around him. It wasn't long before the Medes recognized him for who he was. When his true identity was revealed, it caused a ripple effect, not just among the Persian people, but within the heart of the Median Empire itself. The Persian king, Cambyses, and his son, Cyrus, were not content with their status under the Median yoke. As the years went on, Cyrus's charisma and reputation began to outgrow his birthright. The people of Persia, tired of being subjugated by the Medes, rallied behind him. At the age of 30, Cyrus gathered an army, many of whom had been loyal to his father Cambyses, and marched toward the Median capital, Ecbatana. But the key to Cyrus's success lay not just in the strength of his army, but in his shrewd approach to warfare. Rather than relying purely on direct confrontation with the Medes, Cyrus first sought to weaken their position through a series of strategic alliances. He offered the leaders of smaller Median tribes and key military commanders autonomy in exchange for their loyalty. This promise of stability, along with the opportunity for greater power under a new Persian regime, proved to be irresistible. His tactical brilliance allowed him to break the Median Empire from the inside out, gaining important allies and eroding the Medes' internal support long before he ever needed to clash with their forces in open battle. When Cyrus finally did face Astyages' army in battle, it was less a conflict of strength and more a culmination of years of political maneuvering and manipulation. Astyages, once a mighty king, found his once steadfast supporters now defecting to Cyrus's side. The battle, fought at Pasargadae, would be less about armies clashing in brutal combat and more about the weight of an empire crumbling under its own internal rot. Astyages was defeated, captured, and taken into custody. But rather than the typical fate of a dethroned monarch, where execution would follow, Cyrus chose a different path. He spared Astyages' life, treating him with courtesy and respect, perhaps recognizing that even the fall of kings should be handled with dignity. This act of mercy was an early indication of Cyrus's ability to rule not through fear, but through wisdom. What set Cyrus apart from the likes of other conquerors wasn't just his military strategy, but his diplomatic prowess. Upon his ascension to the throne, he set about uniting the diverse peoples under his rule, offering them autonomy and respect for their customs and traditions. He saw the vastness of his empire not as a territory to be ruled by force, but as a delicate web of cultures that required careful management. Where other empires sought to dominate their subjects through oppression, Cyrus offered peace through cooperation. His respect for the traditions of the Babylonians, for instance, was evident when he conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. Instead of imposing Persian rule through terror, he respected the religious and cultural customs of the Babylonians, even presenting himself as a liberator. The famed Cyrus Cylinder, an ancient artifact from this time, is often cited as a symbol of his approach to governance, as it outlines his respect for religious tolerance and human rights. Cyrus's early reign was marked by a series of similar strategic decisions. He sought to solidify his rule by incorporating local elites into his administration, offering them positions of power in exchange for loyalty. His empire, vast as it was, never lacked for unity because of this careful balance of respect and power sharing. Unlike other rulers who believed in crushing opposition with overwhelming force, Cyrus believed that true strength lay in understanding and accommodating the diverse cultures within his empire. This balance of power and diplomacy was crucial in maintaining stability in an empire that spanned such a vast expanse of land and people. By the time of his death in 530 BCE, Cyrus had created a lasting legacy. His empire was the first truly global empire, one that stretched across 3 continents and linked a vast array of peoples, cultures, and religions. Yet perhaps his greatest legacy was not in the size of his empire, but in the way he ruled it. He achieved more than territorial expansion. He transformed the very idea of what empire could be. His approach to governance set the stage for future rulers, and his reputation as a leader who conquered without war, who won hearts before territories, would echo throughout history. Through careful alliances, diplomacy, and a remarkable ability to win the loyalty of others, Cyrus redefined the art of conquest. Rather than relying solely on military strength, he used intellect, compassion, and respect to unite a fractured world. His success was not simply a matter of military tactics, but of understanding the deeper currents of human society and politics. His reign marked the beginning of a new era in world history, one in which empires could be built not just through bloodshed, but through wisdom and restraint. Cyrus's vision and the way he built his empire would influence countless rulers in the centuries to come, shaping the future of the ancient world. With the fall of the Median Empire and Cyrus's rise to power, the stage was set for the Persian king to expand his influence further. But even as his empire stretched to embrace the vast lands of the Medes, new challenges loomed large. The conquest of Media was only the first in a long series of campaigns that would eventually transform Cyrus from a regional power into the ruler of the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. As he looked outward, Cyrus faced opposition from forces that would not bend easily to his vision. But rather than crumbling under the weight of these obstacles, Cyrus found ways to turn each new complication to his advantage, adapting to the ever-shifting dynamics of the ancient world. The first significant challenge came from the west, where the mighty kingdom of Lydia stood as a formidable obstacle. Lydia, under the rule of King Croesus, was one of the richest and most powerful states of the ancient Near East. Its capital, Sardis, was a glittering jewel of wealth and culture. Croesus had earned his reputation not only for his immense wealth, but for his military prowess. The Lydians were known for their skilled cavalry and their ability to defend their territory against even the most formidable foes. In many ways, Lydia represented a direct challenge to Cyrus's ambitions, standing as a well-established power that would not yield without a fight. As Cyrus's forces grew, so too did his reputation as a ruler who could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Yet, despite the successes he had already achieved, Cyrus had never faced a challenge quite like Lydia. Croesus, who had once been an ally of the Medes, viewed Cyrus's rise with great concern. The idea of a Persian empire spreading across the region was something that Croesus could not allow. He feared that Cyrus's rapid expansion would disrupt the balance of power in Asia Minor and pose a direct threat to his own kingdom's survival. In his attempts to solidify his position, Croesus sought the counsel of the Delphic oracle, one of the most renowned sources of divine insight in the ancient world. The oracle, notorious for its cryptic pronouncements, told Croesus that if he went to war against the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Confident in his own strength and the might of his forces, Croesus took the oracle's words as a sign of inevitable victory. With this divine assurance, Croesus gathered his army and marched toward the Persian frontier, believing that the coming conflict would secure his kingdom's supremacy over the region. Cyrus, however, had been closely monitoring the movements of Lydia. Unlike Croesus, who acted on faith in omens and prophecies, Cyrus relied on a different kind of wisdom, pragmatic, calculated, and informed by the lessons he had learned in his previous campaigns. Rather than rushing into battle without preparation, Cyrus sought to outmaneuver Croesus, recognizing that Lydia's advantage lay not only in its formidable military, but in its wealth. Wealth, however, could be as much a burden as it was an asset. Cyrus knew that the key to defeating Croesus would not be through brute force alone, but by neutralizing Lydia's greatest strength, its treasure. The two armies met at the banks of the river Halys, where a brutal confrontation was set to take place. The battle, which came to be known as the Battle of Thymbra, would be decisive not only for the future of Lydia, but for the broader geopolitical landscape of the ancient world. But even as the Lydian forces advanced, Cyrus had already begun to implement his strategy. He employed a technique that was becoming a hallmark of his approach to warfare, one of strategic deception and clever positioning. By leveraging the geography of the battlefield and positioning his forces in a way that minimized the Lydian cavalry's effectiveness, Cyrus turned the battle into a test of endurance rather than a clash of brute force. The battle itself was a complex dance of tactics, where Cyrus's forces, though numerically smaller, used their knowledge of the terrain to counter Lydia's strengths. When the battle reached its climax, Croesus's forces were routed. The Lydian king, whose fortune had once seemed invincible, was forced to retreat. In the wake of his defeat, the Lydian capital of Sardis fell to Cyrus's forces, and Croesus himself was taken captive. The fall of Lydia marked a significant turning point in Cyrus's campaign, as it removed one of the last major obstacles to his westward expansion. But the defeat of Lydia was not merely a military victory. It had far-reaching consequences for the region. The Persian Empire now controlled the vital trade routes that passed through Asia Minor, gaining access to resources, wealth, and influence that would prove invaluable in future campaigns. More importantly, it demonstrated to the rest of the ancient world that Cyrus was not simply a conqueror. He was a strategist capable of overcoming the greatest of odds. His ability to decisively defeat an empire as powerful as Lydia solidified his reputation as one of history's greatest military minds. Yet, even as Cyrus basked in the fruits of his victory, the challenges continued to mount. To the south lay the great kingdom of Babylon, a city-state of ancient grandeur that had long held sway over the Fertile Crescent. Babylon, under the rule of King Nabonidus, had not yet turned its attention towards Cyrus. But there was little doubt that the Persian king's rising influence would soon draw the attention of Babylon, just as it had with Lydia. The Babylonians, renowned for their cultural and intellectual achievements, would not easily bow to a foreign ruler, and their formidable defenses made them a daunting prospect for any would-be conqueror. Cyrus, however, was not daunted by the size or strength of the Babylonian kingdom. Instead, he viewed the challenge as an opportunity to apply the same diplomatic skills that had served him so well in the past. He understood that, rather than relying solely on military force, the key to conquering Babylon lay in addressing its internal divisions. At the time, Nabonidus was a deeply unpopular king, having alienated many of the Babylonian elites due to his religious reforms and neglect of traditional Babylonian cults. His focus on worshiping the moon god Sin, rather than the chief god Marduk, caused unrest among the Babylonian priesthood, who were deeply influential in the political landscape. Recognizing this, Cyrus began to cultivate relationships with key figures in Babylon's religious and political elite. He promised to respect the Babylonian religion and restore the worship of Marduk, a gesture that appealed to the masses and secured the support of the priesthood. His approach to Babylon was not one of outright conquest, but of liberation, presenting himself as the savior who would rid the Babylonians of the unpopular Nabonidus and restore peace and stability to the region. When the Persian forces finally marched on Babylon in 539 BCE, the city's defenses, though impressive, were weakened by the internal divisions that Cyrus had so carefully cultivated. Rather than a long siege, the city fell with surprising ease. Cyrus entered Babylon, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, and his reign over the city began without the bloodshed that often accompanied such transitions. The Babylonians, disillusioned with Nabonidus's rule, welcomed Cyrus as their new king. His approach to conquest, one that blended diplomacy, respect for local customs, and military skill, had secured another key victory without the need for excessive violence. By the time Cyrus completed his conquest of Babylon, he had become a figure of legend. His empire now spanned across a vast swath of territory, from the heart of Persia to the great cities of Mesopotamia, including Babylon. Yet his greatest strength lay not in the size of his empire, but in his ability to secure the loyalty of the people he conquered. Through a combination of military prowess, diplomatic tact, and cultural sensitivity, Cyrus had built a multi-ethnic empire that was held together not through fear, but through a shared sense of stability and mutual respect. His empire was not merely a collection of territories. It was a testament to the power of governance rooted in respect and pragmatism, a model that would influence rulers for generations to come. With the conquest of Lydia and Babylon, Cyrus the Great had secured his position as one of the most formidable rulers of the ancient world. His empire stretched across a vast expanse, incorporating many different peoples, cultures, and cities. Yet, while the early successes of his reign had solidified his control over the major powers of the Near East, the true test of his leadership was only beginning. As his empire expanded, so too did the complexities of governance, and Cyrus was faced with the challenge of holding together a diverse and sprawling realm. Unlike other conquerors, who relied on brute force to maintain control, Cyrus had proven himself to be a master of diplomacy, respecting the customs and traditions of the people he ruled. But as his empire grew, maintaining this balance would become ever more difficult. The first significant challenge came from the eastern provinces of his empire, where the nomadic tribes of the Central Asian steppes posed a constant threat. These tribes, known for their fierce independence and warrior culture, had long been a source of unrest for the more sedentary civilizations of the ancient world. Cyrus had already proven his ability to defeat traditional armies, but these nomadic groups represented a different kind of challenge. They were not bound by the same territorial concerns or formal military structures as the kingdoms he had conquered. Instead, they lived off the land, moving across vast stretches of the steppes, and fought in smaller, more agile groups. Their lifestyle made them difficult to track and even harder to defeat in open battle. Cyrus understood that the key to dealing with these tribes was not to engage them in direct warfare, but to adapt his military strategy to the realities of their mobile warfare. Rather than confronting them head-on, he focused on cutting off their access to resources, attempting to undermine their mobility and limit their ability to raid the settled regions of his empire. This approach proved effective, but it came at a high cost. The campaigns against the Central Asian tribes were long, arduous, and often inconclusive. Yet, through a combination of military pressure and shrewd diplomacy, Cyrus was able to pacify many of the nomadic groups, forging alliances with some while neutralizing others through economic and political concessions. One of the most significant threats came from the Scythians, a powerful and warlike nomadic people who had long controlled vast territories in the Eurasian steppes. The Scythians had a reputation for their fearsome cavalry and their ability to strike with lightning speed. They had already defeated a number of powerful empires in the region, and their constant raids were a source of frustration for the Persians. Despite their fierce reputation, the Scythians were not an organized state in the traditional sense. Their decentralized structure made it difficult to form a unified response to Cyrus's growing empire. Rather than waging a protracted war, Cyrus attempted to approach the Scythians with a blend of diplomacy and military pressure. He sought to divide their forces, making alliances with some of the smaller tribes while using military force against the more hostile ones. Although the Scythians would continue to pose a threat to Persia for years to come, this strategy of indirect engagement allowed Cyrus to keep them at bay without the need for a full-scale war. As the eastern frontier settled into a fragile peace, Cyrus turned his attention back to the west, where the Greek city-states were beginning to exert their influence over the Mediterranean region. While the Greeks had been relatively isolated from the Persian Empire during its early years, their growing maritime power and their ambitions in Asia Minor posed a potential threat to Cyrus's long-term goals. The Greeks had already established colonies along the western coast of Asia Minor, and their trade networks were beginning to extend into the heart of Cyrus's empire. It was only a matter of time before these city-states would seek to challenge Persian hegemony in the region. Unlike the Lydians or the Babylonians, the Greeks were not a single, unified entity. Instead, they were a collection of fiercely independent city-states, each with its own form of government and military. Their rivalry with one another often made it difficult for the Greeks to unite against a common enemy. Cyrus, however, recognized the potential danger posed by this disunity. While he initially sought to avoid direct confrontation with the Greek city-states, he also understood that it was inevitable that Persia would eventually clash with the Greeks over control of the Mediterranean. Rather than launching an immediate attack, Cyrus adopted a more calculated approach. He sought to exploit the divisions within the Greek world, making use of both diplomacy and military pressure to weaken Greek influence in Asia Minor. By offering protection and autonomy to certain Greek city-states, he was able to divide them and prevent any coordinated resistance against Persian expansion. Over time, his strategy succeeded in securing Persian dominance over the Ionian coast, while the Greeks remained largely preoccupied with their internal divisions and conflicts. Despite these successes, Cyrus's empire was not without its internal challenges. The vastness of the Persian Empire, with its diverse populations and complex political structures, required a level of administrative skill that was unprecedented in the ancient world. Cyrus understood that the key to maintaining stability was to create a system of governance that respected the autonomy of his subjects while still ensuring that the core of his empire remained under his control. He instituted a system of satrapies, or provinces, each governed by a satrap, or provincial governor, who was responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and ensuring loyalty to the king. This decentralized system allowed local rulers to govern according to their own customs and traditions, while still maintaining a strong connection to the central authority of Cyrus. This system of satrapies was not without its flaws. The vast distances between the provinces made it difficult for Cyrus to maintain direct control over every aspect of his empire. Corruption, rebellion, and local rivalries were constant threats to the stability of the empire. Yet, Cyrus was quick to recognize the need for effective communication and strong central authority. He established a sophisticated network of messengers and spies, allowing him to keep tabs on the activities of his satraps and intervene when necessary. By using this network, Cyrus was able to maintain a level of control that was unprecedented for an empire of its size. Despite these challenges, Cyrus's reign remained largely stable. His ability to balance the demands of military conquest with the intricacies of governance allowed him to maintain a sense of unity across his vast empire. But even as he navigated these internal complexities, Cyrus knew that the greatest test of his leadership was yet to come. As his empire grew, so did the sense of ambition among his subjects. Cyrus had already achieved more than most rulers could have dreamed, but his desire for expansion remained unquenchable. His final great challenge came from the east, where the formidable armies of the Indian subcontinent posed an even greater challenge than the Scythians or the Babylonians. The region was home to a number of powerful kingdoms, each with its own military tradition and cultural heritage. The vastness of the Indian subcontinent made it an intimidating prospect, but Cyrus had long understood the importance of reaching the banks of the Indus River. To truly secure his legacy as one of history's greatest conquerors, Cyrus knew that he would need to expand his empire into this fertile and rich region. Yet, as Cyrus prepared for what would likely be his final campaign, fate intervened. In 530 BCE, as he was on the verge of launching an invasion of India, Cyrus fell in battle while fighting against the Massagetæ, a nomadic tribe from the Central Asian steppes. Despite his remarkable successes, it was on the eastern frontier that Cyrus's story would end. His death marked the conclusion of an era, but his legacy as the founder of the Persian Empire would endure for centuries to come. The empire he built, one based on respect for local cultures, diplomatic acumen, and military brilliance, will be passed on to his successors, who would carry forward his vision and continue the expansion of the empire he had founded. As the Persian Empire continued to grow under Cyrus's rule, it became clear that his empire was more than just a political entity. It was a reflection of his vision and the remarkable way he chose to rule. By the time of his final years, Cyrus had already accomplished more than most rulers could ever hope for, consolidating an empire that spanned 3 continents, from the Indus Valley in the east to the Mediterranean in the west. Yet, even as the empire flourished, the question remained, what would Cyrus do with the enormous power he had gathered? His conquests had been methodical, his administration remarkably efficient, and his diplomatic strategies unparalleled. But now, the true test of his legacy was before him. Cyrus's final campaign, his campaign against the Massagetæ, would prove to be the most challenging and ultimately the most tragic of his reign. The Massagetæ, a fierce nomadic tribe from the steppes of Central Asia, had long been a thorn in the side of the Persian Empire. Their warriors were legendary for their skill on horseback, and their queen, Thamyris, was said to be a formidable ruler, capable of leading her people with both wisdom and ruthless determination. The Massagetæ, unlike the sedentary kingdoms Cyrus had previously conquered, were a deeply decentralized people, living off the land and constantly moving across the vast steppes. They had no fixed capital, no traditional army, and no permanent political institutions. What they had, however, was a deep, abiding sense of independence and an unwillingness to submit to any foreign power. Cyrus had long been aware of the Massagetæ as a potential threat. Their territory lay on the fringes of his empire, bordering the lands of the Scythians and the eastern nomadic tribes. Despite their lack of centralized authority, the Massagetæ had proven themselves to be a powerful force, capable of resisting any invader who dare cross their path. After consolidating his power in the west and securing his borders, Cyrus set his sights on the east, preparing to expand Persia's reach even further. He sought to incorporate the Massagetæ into his growing empire, either through military conquest or diplomacy. However, the Massagetæ were not a people who could be easily intimidated or coerced. The conflict began when Cyrus, in his usual manner, attempted to offer a diplomatic solution to the problem. He sent envoys to Queen Thamyris, proposing an alliance or perhaps an agreement of tribute in exchange for peace. However, Thamyris was not interested in any such arrangements. She viewed Cyrus's growing empire with suspicion, seeing him as just another conqueror who would seek to control her people. Thamyris had heard the stories of Cyrus's military prowess, and she knew that he would not be satisfied until he had subdued the Massagetæ. With this understanding, she refused his overtures and instead prepared her people for war. What followed was an encounter that would echo through history as one of the most significant moments in the Persian Empire's early history. The two armies met on the banks of the Sir Darya River, a decisive location that would prove to be a key turning point in the war. The Persian forces, under Cyrus's leadership, were well-organized and well-equipped, their army bolstered by the elite cavalry and infantry that had made Cyrus's conquest possible. However, the Massagetæ were no less formidable. Tamaris, known for her tactical brilliance, had gathered a highly mobile army of horse archers and light cavalry, capable of striking quickly and retreating before the enemy could retaliate. The battle between the two forces was not just one of military might. It was a contest of strategy, tactics, and the will to survive. Cyrus's first attempt to engage the Massagetæ in direct battle was a disaster. Overestimating the strength of his own forces, he launched an aggressive assault on Tamaris' position. But Tamaris, anticipating Cyrus's move, lured the Persians into a trap. The Massagetæ used their superior mobility to strike at the heart of the Persian formation, breaking through their lines and causing chaos. The Persian forces, though well-disciplined, were not accustomed to the guerrilla tactics employed by the Massagetæ. The battle, which initially seemed to favor Cyrus's forces, quickly turned into a rout, with the Persians suffering heavy losses. In the confusion, Cyrus was forced to retreat, his army scattered and demoralized. It was during this retreat that Tamaris made a decisive move that would seal the fate of the battle. Rather than pursuing the Persian army in a full-scale chase, she laid a trap. She offered Cyrus a deal. He could safely withdraw with his remaining forces if he promised to stay out of Massagetæ territory. But in a move that would ultimately prove to be his undoing, Cyrus chose to ignore Tamaris' offer, arrogantly assuming that he could regroup and defeat her forces in a subsequent battle. His refusal to negotiate with Tamaris, whom he underestimated, would come back to haunt him. The second clash between the Massagetæ and the Persians came with disastrous consequences. By now, Cyrus had regrouped his forces and was determined to crush the Massagetæ once and for all. However, Tamaris' forces were ready. Her cavalry struck swiftly and decisively, catching the Persian forces off guard. Despite his best efforts, Cyrus's forces were overwhelmed. The battle that followed was brutal, and when the dust settled, it became clear that the Massagetæ had decisively defeated the Persians. Cyrus himself was killed in battle. His death marked the end of his campaign and, in many ways, the end of an era. His body, according to legend, was captured by Queen Tamaris, who, in an act of vengeance for the loss of her son in the earlier stages of the war, ordered that Cyrus's head be severed and placed in a vessel filled with blood. Tamaris' revenge was a powerful symbol of the cost of underestimating an enemy, and it became a part of the larger mythos that surrounded Cyrus's death. The Massagetæ's victory over the Persian king was not just a military triumph. It was a powerful reminder of the limits of imperial ambition. The death of Cyrus marked a turning point for the Persian Empire. Though his immediate successors would continue his work, his passing left a void that would be difficult to fill. The empire he had built was vast and complex, and after his death, the Persian kings faced challenges not only from external threats like the Massagetæ, but from within, as the vastness of the empire made it increasingly difficult to govern effectively. Nevertheless, the legacy of Cyrus would endure. His empire would continue to expand under his successors and his model of governance, one based on respect for local customs, cultural integration, and pragmatic diplomacy, would be passed down through generations. In the end, it was not the military might of Cyrus that secured his place in history, but his approach to leadership, his ability to unify disparate peoples, to respect their traditions while bringing them under a common banner, created an empire that, despite its challenges, would endure for centuries. Even after his death, the world he had shaped continued to be influenced by his vision, and his legacy as one of history's greatest rulers would remain intact. Though his final campaign ended in tragedy, the empire he created would be remembered not just for its territorial reach, but for the way it reshaped the ancient world. The Persian Empire, as Cyrus had envisioned it, was a testament to the power of wisdom, strategy, and respect for those whom one ruled. Cyrus the Great's death, though a tragic end to an extraordinary reign, did not mark the end of his empire. Instead, it set the stage for a new chapter in the history of Persia. His successors, though not as universally celebrated as he was, were tasked with maintaining and expanding the vast empire he had so carefully constructed. The empire that Cyrus had built was not just a military and political entity. It was a cultural and philosophical force, one that would shape the ancient world for centuries to come. His policies, which emphasized respect for local customs, religious tolerance, and a flexible, decentralized system of governance, set a precedent that would influence not only his immediate successors, but also later rulers, including Alexander the Great and even the Roman emperors. The immediate successor to Cyrus was his son, Cambyses II. Cambyses, who had been serving as the satrap of Babylon during his father's reign, inherited the Persian throne upon Cyrus's death. Although Cambyses was an able military leader, his reign would be marked by significant turmoil and internal conflict. His first major challenge came from Egypt, a kingdom that had long been a symbol of ancient civilization and power. Under Pharaoh Psamtik III, Egypt had recently been in a period of relative weakness, and Cambyses saw an opportunity to expand Persian influence into the fertile lands of the Nile. The conquest of Egypt, while initially successful, would become one of the most controversial chapters in Persian history. Cambyses' campaign began in 525 BCE, and he quickly defeated the Egyptian army at the Battle of Pelusium. The fall of Egypt was swift, and Cambyses assumed control over the country, taking the title of pharaoh. However, his subsequent actions would tarnish his reputation and legacy. According to ancient sources, Cambyses became increasingly erratic and paranoid. He is said to have desecrated Egyptian temples, including the famous temple of Ammonius at Siwa, and even killed members of his own family. Some historians suggest that Cambyses' behavior may have been influenced by a combination of stress, the difficulties of managing an empire, and possibly even mental illness. Despite these actions, Cambyses' reign did achieve some lasting successes. The conquest of Egypt, although marred by brutality, marked a significant expansion of the Persian Empire and secured the empire's dominance over the eastern Mediterranean. Yet by the time Cambyses died in 522 BCE, under mysterious circumstances, possibly assassinated, the Persian Empire was left in a state of disarray. His death created a power vacuum that would lead to internal strife and the rise of a new ruler, Darius I. Darius I, also known as Darius the Great, is often regarded as one of the most important kings of the Achaemenid dynasty. He was not a direct son of Cyrus, but rather a distant relative, and his ascent to the throne was marked by political intrigue and rebellion. After Cambyses' death, a man named Galmada, who claimed to be a son of Cyrus, seized the throne. Galmada's rule was short-lived, as Darius, along with a group of noble conspirators, overthrew him in a daring coup. Darius's rise to power was not only a testament to his ambition, but also to his political acumen. His actions secured the empire from the dangers of internal insurrection and set the stage for a new phase in the history of the Persian Empire. Darius's reign began with a series of reforms aimed at stabilizing the empire. The vastness of the Persian Empire, stretching from Egypt in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, required a highly organized and efficient administrative system. Darius divided the empire into 20 satrapies, or provinces, each governed by a satrap who was responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and ensuring loyalty to the king. This system, which had been established under Cyrus, was refined by Darius and became one of the cornerstones of Persian governance. The satraps, while enjoying significant autonomy, were closely monitored by royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes, to prevent corruption and maintain the integrity of the empire. Darius also undertook ambitious infrastructure projects, including the construction of the Royal Road, which connected the major cities of the empire and facilitated trade, communication, and military mobility. This road, stretching over 1,500 miles from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Asia Minor, was a symbol of Darius's commitment to uniting his empire through commerce and communication. The Royal Road helped to foster economic growth, allowing merchants to travel more easily and goods to flow between the east and west. The creation of a standardized system of weights, and measures further enhanced trade and economic stability across the empire. One of Darius's most enduring legacies was his policy of religious tolerance. Like his predecessors, Darius understood the importance of respecting the beliefs and practices of the diverse peoples within his empire. He did not impose a single religion on his subjects, but instead allowed them to worship according to their own customs. This was particularly important in regions such as Egypt, where the worship of local gods was a central part of daily life. Darius's policy of religious tolerance helped to maintain peace and stability in a realm that was home to many different cultures and belief systems. Despite these successes, Darius's reign was not without challenges. One of the most significant threats came from the Greek city-states, which had begun to emerge as a formidable power in the Mediterranean. The Persians had long been aware of the growing influence of the Greeks, and the tension between the two cultures reached a breaking point in the early 5th century BCE. Darius's first major confrontation with the Greeks came in 490 BCE, when he launched an invasion of Greece. The goal of the invasion was to punish the Greek city-states for their support of the Ionian Revolt, a rebellion against Persian rule in Asia Minor. Darius's army, one of the most formidable military forces in the world, landed on the shores of the Greek mainland, where they met the Athenians at the Battle of Marathon. The Battle of Marathon proved to be a humiliating defeat for Darius's forces. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Athenians, using innovative tactics and superior knowledge of the terrain, inflicted a crushing blow on the Persian army. The victory at Marathon became a symbol of Greek resistance against foreign domination and set the stage for the long struggle between Greece and Persia. Darius, though angry at the defeat, was determined to exact revenge, and plans for a second invasion were already in the works when he died in 486 BC. Darius's death marked another turning point for the Persian Empire. As his son Xerxes, I ascended to the throne. Xerxes, like his father, sought to continue the expansion of the Persian Empire. However, his reign would be defined by the dramatic events of the Second Persian invasion of Greece, which culminated in the famous battles of Thermopylae and Salamis. These events, which are often romanticized in Western historical memory, would shape the future of both the Persian Empire and the Greek world. While Darius's reign was largely successful in consolidating and expanding the Persian Empire, it was the legacy of his father, Cyrus, that continued to resonate. The policies of tolerance, pragmatism, and respect for local customs set by Cyrus remained at the heart of Persian governance. Even in the face of challenges from the Greeks and other external forces, the Persian Empire continued to be a model of stability and administrative efficiency. And though the empire would eventually fall to Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, the example set by Cyrus the Great, the king who conquered not through sheer force, but through diplomacy, wisdom, and respect for his subjects, would live on as a beacon of enlightened leadership. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus and his successors, left an indelible mark on the ancient world. Its innovations in governance, its tolerance for diversity, and its military achievements continue to be studied by historians and scholars to this day. And while the empire eventually fell, the ideals that Cyrus established, peaceful coexistence, cultural integration, and strategic governance, continue to resonate in the ways nations seek to build stability and prosperity today. Darius I, known as Darius the Great, ascended to the Persian throne in 522 BCE after a tumultuous period of rebellion and instability following the death of Cambyses II. His rise to power was not easy. He had to overthrow a false claimant to the throne, Gaumata, who had declared himself king by impersonating the late king's son. This usurpation created a rift within the empire, and many regions were in revolt, testing Darius's authority even before he was fully established as king. But Darius, with his strong sense of ambition and organizational genius, quickly set about restoring order and solidifying his rule. One of Darius's first priorities was to stabilize the empire. The vast Persian Empire, which spanned from Egypt to the Indus Valley, was home to many different peoples, cultures, and religions. The task of governing such a diverse realm required not only military prowess, but also diplomatic skill. Darius understood that the key to holding such an empire together lay in ensuring that local traditions and religions were respected, while also maintaining the power of the central authority. He implemented reforms that both strengthened the empire's political infrastructure and improved the lives of its subjects. Darius's administrative reforms were groundbreaking. He divided the empire into 20 satrapies, provinces, each ruled by a satrap or governor. The satraps were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and administering justice within their regions. This decentralized system of governance allowed local rulers to retain a certain degree of autonomy while still answering to the central authority in Persepolis. To prevent the satraps from gaining too much power, Darius instituted a system of royal inspectors, known as the King's Eyes, who monitored the satraps' actions and ensured that they were loyal to the Persian crown. This system of checks and balances allowed Darius to maintain control over the far-flung corners of his empire without resorting to direct military rule. In addition to his administrative reforms, Darius also oversaw a series of large-scale infrastructure projects. One of the most significant of these was the construction of the Royal Road, which stretched over 1,500 miles from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Asia Minor. This road facilitated communication, trade, and the movement of troops across the empire. The Royal Road was a symbol of Darius's vision to create a connected and unified empire, where goods, ideas, and people could move freely across vast distances. Along the road, Darius built a series of rest stations, where travelers could rest, resupply, and continue their journey. The road also helped foster economic growth by making trade between the eastern and western parts of the empire more efficient. Darius's other notable accomplishment was the standardization of weights, measures, and currency. Under his rule, the Persian Empire adopted a system of standardized coinage, with the gold daric and the silver siglos becoming the standard currencies across the empire. This new system made trade more efficient and helped integrate the economies of the various satrapies. Darius also instituted a system of standardized weights and measures, which ensured that goods could be exchanged fairly across the empire. These reforms not only made the Persian economy more robust, but also helped to maintain a sense of unity across the diverse regions of the empire. Although Darius's domestic policies were a significant success, the external threats to the empire were never far from his mind. One of the most pressing challenges he faced came from the Greek city-states. The Greeks had long been a thorn in the side of the Persians, particularly in the region of Asia Minor. The Ionians, who lived along the coast of Asia Minor, had been under Persian control since the conquest of Lydia. However, they were not content with Persian rule, and in 499 BCE, they revolted against the empire, sparking the Ionian Revolt. The Greeks were supported in their rebellion by Athens and Eretria, two powerful Greek city-states. The revolt lasted for several years, and despite the Persians' overwhelming military superiority, the Ionians were not easily defeated. The Ionian Revolt was a humiliation for the Persians. Darius, determined to punish the Greeks for their interference, vowed to exact revenge. In 490 BCE, he launched an invasion of Greece, sending a massive army across the Aegean Sea to punish Athens and Eretria for their role in the revolt. The Persian fleet, commanded by Datis and Artaphernes, landed at the plains of Marathon, about 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians, despite being vastly outnumbered, decided to confront the Persian army in battle. The Battle of Marathon became one of the most famous confrontations in history. The Greeks, led by the Athenian general Miltiades, used superior tactics and knowledge of the terrain to outflank the Persians. The Persian forces, despite their size and strength, were defeated, and the battle marked the first major setback for Darius's empire. The Athenians, buoyed by their victory, sent a messenger, Phidippides, to run the 26 miles back to Athens to deliver the news. The victory at Marathon became a symbol of Greek resistance against foreign rule, and the Persians, humiliated by their defeat, withdrew their forces from Greece. The loss at Marathon was a blow to Darius's ambitions. It was a significant moment in the history of the Persian Empire, as it marked the first time that the Greeks had been able to defeat the Persians on the battlefield. Darius, though furious, did not let the defeat deter him. He began preparing for a larger and more decisive invasion of Greece, intending to crush the Greek city-states once and for all. However, before he could launch his second invasion, Darius died in 486 BCE, possibly due to illness or complications from his efforts to maintain control over the empire. His death left the task of subduing Greece to his son, Xerxes I. Despite his failure in Greece, Darius's reign is remembered for his administrative brilliance, military ambition, and ability to consolidate a vast and diverse empire. He set the foundations for the expansion of the Persian Empire, which would reach its greatest extent under his son Xerxes and later rulers. Darius's reforms, particularly in the areas of governance, infrastructure, and economy, helped to make the Persian Empire one of the most powerful and sophisticated civilizations of the ancient world. His legacy, however, was not only defined by his domestic achievements, but also by his relationship with the Greek world, which would continue to shape the fate of both Persia and Greece in the centuries to come. Darius's reign also set the stage for the expansion of Persian influence into Egypt, India, and beyond. His military campaigns against the Scythians, as well as his successful subjugation of Egypt, helped to further consolidate Persian control over the ancient Near East. Darius's ability to manage such a vast empire, to integrate new territories, and to forge alliances with other powers ensured the longevity of the Achaemenid dynasty. Even though he was not able to achieve his ultimate goal of defeating the Greek city-states, Darius's reign laid the groundwork for future Persian expansion and the enduring legacy of the Persian Empire. Xerxes I, the son of Darius the Great, ascended to the throne of the Persian Empire in 486 BCE after the death of his father. His reign would be marked by ambition, conflict, and an enduring struggle against the Greek city-states, particularly Athens, which had become a symbol of resistance against Persian dominance. While Darius had laid the foundations for the Persian Empire to reach its greatest extent, it was under Xerxes that the empire faced some of its most significant challenges. His attempt to conquer Greece and subjugate the rebellious city-states will become one of the most defining episodes in Persian history. Xerxes inherited an empire that spanned from the Indus Valley in the east to Egypt and the Mediterranean in the west, a realm that had become the largest the world had ever seen. However, his succession was not without difficulties. Immediately after his ascension, Xerxes had to contend with revolts in Egypt, which had long been a semi-autonomous part of the Persian Empire, as well as disturbances in Babylon. These uprisings were a reminder of the fragility of Persian rule over its diverse and far-reaching territories. But despite these internal problems, Xerxes was determined to continue his father's legacy and pursue his own vision of Persian grandeur. One of the first and most significant challenges of Xerxes' reign came from the Greek city-states, particularly Athens, which had been a thorn in the side of Persia ever since its involvement in the Ionian Revolt and its pivotal role in the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. Following Darius's death, Xerxes vowed to finish what his father had started, to punish the Greeks for their defiance and to extend Persian hegemony over the Greek world. This desire for revenge, combined with his ambition to create an even greater Persian empire, led to the decision to launch a massive invasion of Greece. Xerxes' preparations for war were immense. He assembled one of the largest armies ever seen in the ancient world, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and brought with him a vast fleet of ships to carry his forces across the Aegean Sea. The Persian army, composed of soldiers from various parts of the empire, included Medes, Persians, Egyptians, and other tributary peoples. This immense force was intended to overwhelm the Greek city-states and ensure that Persia would dominate the entire Mediterranean world. But Xerxes' ambitions were not solely military. He also sought to assert Persian supremacy over Greek culture, which he saw as a challenge to his empire's authority. The conflict between Persia and Greece, which had begun with the Ionian Revolt, had now escalated into a full-scale war for the future of the ancient world. In 480 BCE, Xerxes launched his invasion. The Persian forces crossed the Hellespont, modern-day, Dardanelles, using a pontoon bridge constructed across the strait. The spectacle of this crossing, with Xerxes' army pouring into Europe, became a symbol of Persian might. However, it also marked the beginning of one of the most famous military campaigns in history, the Greco-Persian Wars. The first major engagement between the Persian forces and the Greeks occurred at the Battle of Thermopylae, where a small Greek force, led by King Leonidas I of Sparta, made a heroic stand against the vast Persian army. The Greek forces, though vastly outnumbered, used the narrow pass of Thermopylae to their advantage, holding off the Persians for several days. Despite their bravery, the Greek forces were eventually betrayed by a local traitor who showed Xerxes' army a secret mountain pass, allowing them to flank the Greeks. The Spartans and their allies fought to the death, and King Leonidas himself fell in battle. Though the battle was a defeat for the Greeks, it became a symbol of resistance and courage, and it inspired the Greek world to unite against the Persian threat. While the Persians had won at Thermopylae, their victory was not without cost. The Greeks had bought valuable time, and the Persian forces were forced to move forward into Greece's heartland. However, the Greeks had already begun to regroup. The next major confrontation came at the naval battle of Salamis, fought in the narrow straits between the island of Salamis and the Athenian coast. Here, the Greek fleet, led by Themistocles, decisively defeated the Persian navy. The Greek triremes, faster and more maneuverable than the larger Persian ships, were able to trap and destroy a large portion of Xerxes' fleet. The defeat at Salamis was a turning point in the war, as it deprived Xerxes of his naval superiority and forced him to rethink his strategy. After Salamis, the Persian army, though still formidable, began to falter. The Greeks, having seen the vulnerability of the Persian forces, rallied their allies and launched a counteroffensive. In 479 BCE, the Greek city-states, united by their fear of Persian domination, won a decisive victory at the Battle of Plataea. The Persian army, though still large and powerful, was decisively defeated by the combined forces of Sparta, Athens, and other Greek allies. The defeat at Plataea marked the end of Xerxes' campaign in Greece and the beginning of the decline of Persian influence in the Mediterranean. Xerxes, despite his failure in Greece, returned to Persia with a sense of both personal frustration and public humiliation. His dream of extending Persian rule over Greece had been shattered, and he faced the daunting task of rebuilding both his military and his reputation. In the years following his defeat, Xerxes turned his attention back to the internal stability of his empire. He worked to restore the order that had been disrupted by his military campaign, addressing rebellions and revolts in regions such as Egypt and Babylon. Despite these challenges, Xerxes' reign was not without its successes. He continued his father's policy of religious tolerance and sought to maintain the stability of the vast Persian Empire. He also focused on monumental building projects, including the completion of the Grand Palace at Persepolis, which became a symbol of the Persian Empire's wealth and power. However, the failure of his Greek campaign remained a shadow over his reign, and in the years following the war, his rule became increasingly unpopular. Internal dissension, coupled with the growing influence of his courtiers, eventually led to Xerxes' assassination in 465 BCE. His death marked the end of a reign that had seen both great ambition and profound failure. Xerxes' death left the Persian Empire in a state of instability. His son, Artaxerxes I, succeeded him, but the empire was weakened by the internal strife and external threats that had plagued Xerxes' later years. The legacy of Xerxes I, however, remained deeply connected to the grand ambitions he had pursued, especially his attempts to conquer Greece. Though he had failed in this endeavor, his reign marked a critical juncture in the conflict between the Persian Empire and the Greek city-states, a conflict that would continue to shape the course of history. In the end, Xerxes' reign illustrates the complex nature of leadership in the ancient world. While he inherited one of the greatest empires in history and sought to build on his father's achievements, his failure to subdue Greece demonstrated the limits of Persian power. The wars with the Greeks left a lasting mark on both cultures, shaping their futures and their views of each other. While Xerxes' empire would continue for many years after his death, the defeat at the hands of the Greeks marked a permanent shift in the balance of power in the ancient world, with Greece emerging as a dominant cultural and military force. After the death of Xerxes I in 465 BCE, the Persian Empire began a slow but unmistakable decline. His assassination marked a period of instability and uncertainty, where the empire's once unified structure began to show cracks. Xerxes had faced both military defeats and internal revolts, and while he had returned to Persia after his Greek campaign with the intention of solidifying his rule, his later years were marked by political intrigue and court conspiracies. His son, Artaxerxes I, ascended the throne following his assassination, inheriting not only a vast empire, but also the burden of rebuilding the morale and strength of Persia. Artaxerxes I was not the military leader that his predecessors had been. Instead, he was a ruler who relied on diplomacy and internal consolidation rather than the aggressive military campaigns that had characterized the reigns of Cyrus the Great and Darius I. His rule, which lasted from 465 BCE to 424 BCE, was primarily focused on stabilizing the empire's internal administration and dealing with the constant threats from Egypt, as well as managing the remnants of Persian military involvement in Greece. His reign is often considered one of relative peace and prosperity, though not without significant challenges. One of Artaxerxes' first major issues was the situation in Egypt. The Egyptians, who had long been a volatile and semi-autonomous region of the Persian Empire, rebelled against Persian rule shortly after Xerxes' death. Egypt had historically been difficult for Persia to control, as the Egyptians were fiercely proud of their culture and traditions. During Artaxerxes' reign, the Persian Empire had to mount several military campaigns to bring Egypt back under control, but these efforts were not entirely successful. Egypt continued to resist Persian domination, leading to a protracted series of conflicts. Despite Artaxerxes' attempts to quell these uprisings, Egypt remained a thorn in the side of the Persian Empire, further draining its resources. Meanwhile, the Greek city-states, particularly Athens, continued to be a source of frustration for the Persian Empire. After the defeat of Xerxes' forces at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, the Greeks began to assert their dominance in the Mediterranean. Athens, in particular, emerged as a naval power, with its fleet controlling much of the Aegean Sea. Persia had maintained influence over the Ionian Greek cities along the western coast of Asia Minor. But as the power of Athens grew, so too did the tensions between the Greeks and the Persians. The rise of Athens as a dominant naval power was a significant challenge for Artaxerxes. The Persians, who had long relied on their vast land army, found themselves struggling to compete with the Greek maritime prowess. Despite their considerable resources and manpower, the Persians were unable to decisively break Athens' hold over the Greek world. Moreover, the Greeks were not a monolithic force, and internal divisions within the Greek city-states made it difficult for Persia to use diplomacy to unite them against a common enemy. Instead, Artaxerxes was forced to deal with a series of smaller but important diplomatic and military engagements with individual Greek states. Internally, Artaxerxes faced his own set of challenges. The satrapies, which were supposed to maintain order in the far-reaching territories of the empire, began to show signs of rebellion. Several satraps began to act with increasing independence, disregarding central authority. This was particularly evident in the eastern provinces, where local rulers sought to gain autonomy, and in the western regions, where the power of the Greek city-states began to weaken Persian control. Artaxerxes was forced to send military expeditions to reinforce central authority, but this only served to further drain the empire's resources and manpower. In the final years of Artaxerxes' reign, the Persian Empire began to experience significant political instability. His death in 424 BCE led to a brief succession crisis, with a series of short-reigned kings, such as Xerxes II and Darius II, struggling to maintain control of the empire. These rulers were weak and unable to command the respect and loyalty of the empire's elites, further undermining the authority of the Persian throne. During this time, The empire's internal struggles intensified. The power of the satraps grew, and many regions within the empire were left to fend for themselves, often in open defiance of the central authority. It was during this period of weakening internal control that the Greek world began to flourish. The Peloponnesian War, which raged between Athens and Sparta from 431 BCE to 404 BCE, had seen the Greeks themselves engage in destructive infighting. However, in the aftermath of this war, the Greek city-states were weakened, and the power vacuum created by their conflict opened the door for new threats. One of these threats would come from an unexpected source: the rise of Macedon, a relatively small kingdom located to the north of Greece. Macedon had long been considered a peripheral power in the ancient world. However, under the leadership of King Philip II, the kingdom began to expand its influence. Philip II's military genius and ability to unite the disparate Greek city-states under his rule laid the foundation for what would become one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in history. After the assassination of Philip II in 336 BCE, his son, Alexander the Great, ascended the throne. Alexander's ambition and military prowess would lead him on a path that would eventually bring the end of the Persian Empire. Alexander's campaign against Persia began in 334 BCE, when he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor with a well-disciplined army and a clear vision of conquest. The Persian Empire, now in a state of disarray after decades of internal turmoil and weakened by years of rebellion and conflict, was not prepared for the onslaught that Alexander unleashed. The Persian army, under King Darius III, attempted to halt the Greek advance, but it was no match for Alexander's tactics. Alexander won a series of decisive victories, including the Battle of Granicus, the Battle of Issus, and the Battle of Gaugamela, which culminated in the complete defeat of Darius III and the collapse of the Achaemenid dynasty. The fall of Darius III marked the end of the Persian Empire, but it was also the end of an era in the ancient world. For more than 2 centuries, the Persian Empire had been a dominant power, a beacon of governance and culture, and a formidable force in the ancient world. From the reign of Cyrus the Great to the failures of Xerxes and the decline under Artaxerxes, the empire had shaped the course of history, leaving behind a legacy of governance, tolerance, and military innovation. But the rise of Alexander the Great and his ability to unite the Greek world under his rule brought an end to Persian hegemony in the East. Though the Persian Empire itself had fallen, the legacy of its rule continued to resonate in the lands it once controlled. The policies of tolerance, the efficient administration, and the monumental infrastructure projects, such as the Royal Road and the canal irrigation systems, left an indelible mark on the cultures that followed. Even as the empire crumbled, the vision of Cyrus the Great, an empire based on respect for diversity and pragmatic governance, continued to influence future rulers, including the Seleucid Empire, which emerged from the remnants of the Persian Empire after Alexander's conquests. As the Persian Empire faded into history, the world turned its attention to the new powers that had emerged from its ashes. But the echoes of Persia's once great reign would reverberate for centuries, influencing the political, cultural, and social landscapes of the ancient world and beyond.